There are a whole host of issues to be aware of in the recruitment process. Often the problems stem from a lack of training on the part of the managers, and combined with the fact that there are now a whole host of discrimination issues to be aware of, this area is increasingly a breeding ground for disputes. I'm joined by Julia Stirling, an employment lawyer at Healys Solicitors, to discuss some of the key points that clients need to consider before embarking on a recruitment drive. So Julia, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So if we can look at recruitment, what are really the big issues that your clients are facing in this area?
Our clients worry about age, health and still sex discrimination issues when recruiting.
So how really can your clients avoid any challenges of discrimination when they're advertising for a position?
The critical thing is to concentrate on what the job needs rather than the type of person that you think you might be looking for, because then you will take an objective approach through the whole process.
But what about the actual interview? I mean, I still hear anecdotes about women being asked whether or not they're intending to start a family, which is obviously a terrible mistake to make. But what really can your clients do to avoid claims of discrimination?
They should think really carefully in the questions they're preparing and asking about how those questions relate to the job that they're recruiting to, rather than concentrating on the type of person that's going to be coming through the door. So a good idea is to have some interview questions set up in advance, which are going to be asked consistently to all candidates and which are matched very carefully to the job specification. And in that scenario, you should be able to avoid any traps that you might be worried about you or your managers falling into in recruiting.
But what about a client who asks both male and female candidates if they're thinking of starting a family? Would that avoid the issue?
I don't think that would be very helpful. The reason is it perhaps sounds like a neutralising of a difficult question, but in practice women still have most of the burden of childcare and the requirement for leave, and so any woman in that situation is going to justifiably think, well, why is that question being asked? And if I say, yes, I'm going to be starting a family soon, they'll be thinking they're not going to get the job. So the critical point is, why ask the question? Why is it relevant?
So at the actual interview, what if you have a situation where there's a female candidate who either admits that she's pregnant or is evidently pregnant? What should an employer do?
The interviewer should really treat it as not something that's relevant. Clearly, if that's the best person for the job, having gone through the process, asked the questions and checked what the requirements of the job are, if that person is the best person for the job, they should get the job. It's good to have a structure and to have training. And also, for example, if you have a situation where you've got a heavily pregnant candidate, that may cause an inexperienced, untrained interviewer to make the sort of inappropriate comments that can cause problems for the employer. So they just need to be trained and prepared to deal with the unexpected in that situation.
So, I mean, you can't obviously prevent people from making assumptions about candidates of a certain age or a certain sex. I mean, do clients really need to be aware of that?
Again, the same sort of approach is going to be helpful, but it's critical to keep a record of everything you've done. So if you have a short listing, an advert and an interview process which is objective and consistent, and you record the reasons for your decisions, then you've got a good defence if anyone says, well, I think you discriminated against me in the process, because you can demonstrate what your decision was based on and you have a record of it.
Sort of about discrimination regarding age, which is quite a hot topic. Is it the similar process to sex discrimination?
There's no difference in the approach. You just want to be clear that your questions are relevant and you're not looking for a specific type of person. If you ask for a mature candidate, that is probably something to be avoided. Why do you need someone who's mature? Think about the job description and what the person is going to be doing.
So are there any situations where a client's allowed to discriminate?
There is an occupational requirement where an employer can require a certain protected characteristic. So that could be age, race, gender, etc. An example might be a counselling service for women where you would want to have women counsellors, and you would have to make clear why that was and justify it.
But I mean, how does a client prove that discrimination wasn't in their minds when they made a decision about a candidate?
It's just important to keep records of the decisions made and the reasons for them, together with the objective criteria that they've set out in the recruitment process. And that should be a defence to any challenge that's made of discrimination.
So what about health? That's quite a big topic at the moment. How far can a client go in terms of checking up on a candidate's health records?
In relation to health, again, it's useful to keep at the forefront of your mind what does the job require, rather than what type of person do we have in front of us. It's important in recruitment to be clear that since the Equality Act 2010, you can't now ask about health status before you've made a job offer. There are some exceptions to this, and that one of those exceptions includes, for example, arrangements for the interview. So you may want to ask all candidates whether they need any adjustments made so that they can come to the interview. But in general, health questions should only be asked once an offer is made, and then in order to check that the job can be carried out safely, or to check if any reasonable adjustments are needed.
So can you actually make an offer of employment conditional upon the appropriate sort of approval of health records?
You can do, provided that's directed towards the intrinsic requirement of the job for the health to be good. Otherwise, you want to be clear that you can't then turn down a candidate because you don't like the look of their health record if that's not related to the job.
So say I'm an employer and I want to find out about the number of sick days potential candidates taken. Who do I ask? The actual candidate or their previous employer, or who?
They should be aware of the delicacy of asking that question in view of the Equality Act, as I mentioned. They shouldn't ask the ex-employer without the consent of the employee, and ideally ask the employee if it's justifiable to do that. The ex-employer should not be disclosing information like that unless it has the consent of the employee in any event.
So what should a client do if they take someone on and then they subsequently discover that that candidate has lied about perhaps their qualifications or about their health or something like that?
With someone who lies perhaps about their qualifications, again, you might have to take that very seriously. If qualifications were a requirement, then it would entitle you in principle, if that was the case, to terminate the contract. With health, you might want to take a slightly different approach because there are all kinds of reasons why employees are worried about disclosing health conditions. So again, find out what the situation is. It may be resolvable, it may not be relevant at all. So you just need to keep a sense of perspective with what's happening with health in particular.
So what's the current state of play regarding references?
References in some areas of work have become less critical than they were. Understandably, employers have become a bit nervous about doing a full and detailed reference for every ex-employee because of the perceived or perhaps real dangers of claims being made. So often you get a one-liner reference these days, just confirming dates and job descriptions. It is important for employers, when they're giving a reference, that they shouldn't mislead. So they have a duty both to the employee and to the future employer.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Julia.
You're welcome.